Ayatollah Khomeini, the return that changed the nation. It was February 1, 1979. Tehran woke to a dense fog blanketing its skies, but through that heavy morning mist, something historic pierced through. A chartered Air France flight descended slowly onto Iranian soil. The engines quieted, the doors opened, and out stepped a man in black robes, a thick white beard, piercing eyes, and a commanding silence. Ayatollah Khomeini had returned home. After 14 years in exile, spent in Iraq and later France, the man who had become a symbol of resistance to monarchy and westernization stood once again on Iranian ground. For many Iranians, this moment marked more than the return of a man. It was the dawn of a new era. As news spread, millions surged into the streets of Tehran. The crowds were euphoric, overflowing with hope and belief. They didn't just welcome Khomeini, they worshipped him. Every step he took was met with roars. Every word he spoke was repeated by millions. It was, in every sense, a revolutionary homecoming. But revolutions are only the beginning. As one saying goes, starting a revolution is easy, building a nation is the hard part. To understand Iran, you must understand Khomeini. Khomeini didn't emerge overnight. His influence had been building for decades. In the 1950s and 60s, while the Shah of Iran pursued modernization and Western alliances, Khomeini positioned himself as the voice of resistance. The Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, envisioned a secular, prosperous Iran, one with Western dress codes, Hollywood films, and women in the workplace. But to Khomeini, this was spiritual decay. It wasn't modernization, it was betrayal of Islam, of Iran's soul. Khomeini's speeches were powerful, unapologetic, and deeply rooted in Shia theology. In 1964, the Shah exiled him, first to Turkey, then to Iraq. Eventually, he settled in a village outside Paris. But exile didn't silence him. Instead, it amplified his message. In Iraq, he developed a political theory that would later become the foundation of Iran's theocracy, Velayat-e-Faqih, or guardianship of the Islamic jurist. The premise: since Islam must be governed by divine law, and only the most learned clerics fully understood Sharia, it was natural, even necessary, for religious scholars to govern a truly Islamic society. This wasn't just a theory, it was a blueprint for the future. The fall of the Shah, the rise of a new vision. By 1978, the Shah's regime was crumbling. Widespread protests, fueled by poverty, corruption, and authoritarian rule, had engulfed the country. The monarchy had lost legitimacy. Revolutionary forces, from secular leftists to religious Islamists, were uniting, not because they shared a vision, but because they shared an enemy. In the chaos, revolutionary leaders began drafting a new constitution. It had checks and balances, a president, parliament, and even drew from global democratic ideals. It had no mention of supreme leader, and it did not include Velayat-e-Faqih. When Khomeini returned, he publicly supported this draft, calling it a good starting point. But behind closed doors, he had different intentions. He knew Iran was politically fragmented, with competing ideologies from Marxists, nationalists, secular Democrats, and religious groups. To consolidate control, he had to move strategically. His first step, a nationwide referendum. The question, should Iran become an Islamic republic? The answer, 98.2% voted yes. Armed with this overwhelming support, Khomeini scrapped the idea of a broad-based constitutional convention. Instead, he formed a new body, the Assembly of Experts, comprised mostly of clerics loyal to him. They rewrote the constitution from scratch, this time enshrining Velayat-e-Faqih into law. Khomeini was declared supreme leader for life, with authority over all branches of government, military and judiciary. By 1980, Iran had officially become the Islamic Republic, not just in name, but in structure, law, and ideology. The Islamic Cultural Revolution. With political power consolidated, Khomeini turned his focus to reshaping Iranian society. Before the revolution, Iran had been socially liberal. Western music played in cafes. Universities taught secular subjects. Women wore miniskirts in Tehran. But Khomeini believed this cultural freedom was moral corruption, a legacy of Western imperialism. So in 1981, he launched what became known as the Cultural Revolution. Universities were shut down for over 2 years. Books were purged, textbooks were rewritten. Roughly 20,000 educators and professors were removed from their positions, labeled too secular, too Western, too dangerous. Music, fashion, cinema, all were strictly censored. Hijabs were made mandatory. Western dress was condemned. Iran, in a matter of months, had transformed from a semi-secular society into a deeply conservative Islamic state. But change sparked resistance. The birth of the Revolutionary Guard. Khomeini didn't trust the regular Iranian army. After all, it had once helped overthrow a democratically elected government in 1953, installing the Shah. Instead, he formed a new force, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps (IRGC). Answerable only to the supreme leader, the IRGC rapidly grew into a parallel military. It patrolled neighborhoods, enforced Islamic codes, and ensured ideological loyalty. It had its own air force, navy, and intelligence network. By the mid-1980s, it wasn't just a military force, it was an economic and political powerhouse. Democracy in form, theocracy in practice. Iran held its first presidential election in 1980. The winner, Abul Hassan Bani Sadrar, was no hardliner. Though close to Khomeini, he believed in democratic principles and human rights. But tensions soon erupted. Parliament, dominated by Islamic radicals, rejected Bani Sadra's policies. Khomeini ultimately sided with the clerics. Bani Sadra was impeached and fled to France. The crackdown intensified. Thousands of political dissidents, liberals, communists, secularists were arrested. Many were executed. Others disappeared. In August 1981, opposition forces struck back, bombing the Islamic Republic Party headquarters, killing the new president and prime minister. Khomeini's response? Even more control. A complex power web. Iran's political structure became a hybrid, part theocracy, part republic, but always dominated by the clerics. Let's simplify. President elected manages economy and administration, but can't control the military or foreign policy. Parliament, Majlis, 290 members directly elected, but all laws must pass through the Guardian Council, 12 members, half chosen by the supreme leader, half by the judiciary. They can veto any law. They approve or reject election candidates. In one case, out of 230 people applying to run for president in 1997, only 4 were approved. Assembly of experts, 86 clerics, elected every 8 years. Their job? Choose the next supreme leader, but their own candidates are vetted by the Guardian Council, Expediency Council created by Khomeini in 1988 to resolve disputes but typically favors hardline position. The result? An elegant system where the appearance of democracy exists, but real power flows from one unelected office, the supreme leader. Reform rejected again and again. In 1997, Iranians voted overwhelmingly for Mohammad Khatami, a reformist who promised moderation, free speech, and dialogue with the West. He was re-elected in 2001. But in 2004, the Guardian Council disqualified over 2,000 reformist candidates from parliamentary election. The hardliners regained control. Same in 2021. Moderate President Hassan Rouhani left office. Out of 590 applicants, only 7 were approved. Hardliner Ibrahim Raisi won by default. Every attempt at reform is eventually blocked by the supreme leader's loyal institutions. What lies ahead for the Islamic Republic? The military? No threat. It was gutted after the bloody 8-year Iran-Iraq war, which claimed over 250,000 Iranian lives. Today's armed forces stay far from politics, deliberately. Internal clerical dissent? Perhaps. Khomeini's original successor, Ayatollah Hussein Ali Montazeri, was dismissed in 1988 after criticizing mass executions. In 1989, after Khomeini's death, a relatively unknown cleric, Ali Khamenei, was appointed supreme leader. He remains in power to this day, now 84 years old. His successor remains uncertain. President Raisi is a frontrunner, but illness, rival factions, and internal unrest could change everything. A revolution at a crossroads. Nearly half a century since Khomeini's return, the Islamic Republic endures. It has built a vast regional network, from Lebanon to Iraq to Yemen. It has resisted Western pressure, endured sanctions, and survived war. But inside the country, frustration grows. Economic hardship, youth unemployment, gender restrictions, crushed protests. The anger simmers beneath the surface. Can the regime evolve fast enough to survive? History warned. Revolutions that don't adapt collapse. The Soviet Union, Arab Spring regimes, even monarchies like the Shah's. Iran's challenge is clear. How do you preserve ideological purity while meeting the demands of a restless, modern population? One wrong move, and the very system Khomeini built could face the same fate as the one he overthrew. More tools, more tips, more truth coming your way. See you in the next one.